Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this episode of the Women in Analytics Community One-on-One. Today, our topic is change management for data science, a framework to apply logical thinking to change management. My name is Ashley Titus, and I am a community moderator for Women in Analytics, also a sales executive for Slalom Consulting. Our special guest today is Katie Robert. She is the co-founder and CEO of Trust Insights. Katie has an incredible skill set and perspective around change management and data science, and she will be sharing with us her insights into building an effective change management framework. Katie, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. We are excited to learn your tips and tricks within change management, which I am confident will give our listeners valuable guidance as they embark on their change management journey. So thank you again for joining us, and I will give you the floor for introductions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Ashley. So, as you mentioned, I'm Katie Robert. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Trust Insights. Prior to working at Trust Insights or running Trust Insights, I actually have more of an academic and clinical research background, which is where a lot of my understanding and then practices of change management came into play. And so I used to do NIH and NIDA clinical research, phase 1 and phase 2, and then I transitioned into the phase 3 of those projects, which was the commercialization, which is where I learned a lot of my product management skills. And the through working on the clinical research, I learned a lot about data quality, data integrity, research, and then as we got into the commercialization, a lot about engineering and marketing and sales and creative. And so tying the two together is really where I was able to think more thoroughly around, well, this kind of needs like a universal process. And so as I moved farther and farther away from research and academia to more of the private sector, I was finding that the practices and the structures that I was using in clinical research and in product development for clinical research really applied. And so borrowing from Agile methodology and then developing a more structured change management process that now at Trust Insights we could apply to every single project.
Got it. Well, thank you for that background. I think that, I'm personally really curious around, how you incorporate, not only how you incorporate data science into a change management framework, but really why is it important for leadership to actually do that? How do they, select the right platforms and tools? How do they get started into that process? And also, how do they recognize that it's really important to do that?
So one of the things that I saw was a gap when I, moved from clinical research to what I'm doing now was that there was really no consideration for the people who were involved with adopting data science protocols or a piece of technology, a platform. And so a really great example of that is something like a CDP, which is a customer data platform, which a lot of companies use. And where I've seen the implementation of a customer data platform go wrong is there's not a lot of upfront conversation with the variety of people who will be interacting with it or the people whose data would be flowing into it. So one of the things that we're dealing with now, especially in the marketing industry, is what's being called the cookieless future. And so this is going to create a huge problem for marketers who are reliant on cookieing people versus getting actual contact information. And so it's that contact information, first name, last name, email, etc., that then needs to feed into the CDP, the customer data platform. And where this fits into data science is we will be relying on a lot of artificial intelligence to fill those gaps where the data just isn't being collected because we've chosen systems that aren't collecting the data. We've not thought ahead to this cookieless future. we've not created compelling enough content that would warrant people wanting to give us their contact information. And so where change management comes into that is really thinking through, the way that I broke it down is the 5 Ps. So purpose, people, process, platform, and performance. And this can be a, sort of like a big piece of documentation, or it can be a really straightforward, set of 5 questions. And so in this example of a customer data platform, what is the purpose of having the platform? Well, we want to know, from start to finish how somebody finds out about us and then when they sign up for our stuff. And so that's a fairly straightforward use case. When it starts to get really complicated is the people in the process. And so who are the people who need to be involved? Is it IT and sales and marketing and engineering and the data team and the leadership team to make decisions? Every single one of those stakeholders is going to have a different agenda going into, here's why we want to use a CDP. Everybody's going to have a different need for the data coming out of it. And so that's where you should be spending the majority of your time, is figuring out what do people need, so that when you do get to choosing a platform or creating a process around how the data is collected and analyzed, you have all of that upfront information. When I worked in product development, we used to have a stakeholder that we would jokingly, but not jokingly, call an N of one, because for good or for bad, he had all the decision making power, and he didn't care what anybody else wanted. He felt like he knew best. And so because of that, the product that we were creating really suffered, because we had a 6-page long contact form for people just to sign up for more information, because he wanted to collect everything all at once up front. And Ashley, I don't know about you, but I don't want to fill out 6 pages of
No.
my personal information just to find out that this isn't the product for me.
Right.
And so it's just, it's thinking through the user story of, as a product owner, I want to understand the customer journey so that I can, instruct my marketing team. It's breaking it down into simple statements like that, knowing that everybody, you, me, IT, whoever, is going to have a different need for the thing. That's a big part of change management, because if you don't do that up front, you may just be putting technology on top of existing issues and not really fixing anything. And that's the big issue right now. And
Right.
that's why I focus so much on change management.
Got it. So you mentioned the people aspect, which I think is incredibly important when, looking at frameworks like this. I mean, whether it's, the decision makers or the stewards of the data, your individual contributors, that piece is very critical to making business transformation very effective. Um, any kind of large transformational change is a very significant undertaking. Successful and efficient user adoption of new technologies, processes, et cetera, can be quite challenging. So can you give our listeners some tips on how to, navigate the resistance through the cultural shift that change management brings in large transformation projects?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really great, example, because any kind of business or digital transformation tends to skip over the what's in it for me. And so what I've seen is, a lot of times leadership will just say, all right, we're going to do this thing now. We are going to, just a very simple example, pivot from Facebook to Twitter. End of discussion. That's our transformation. That's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to hang our hat on. And then what ends up happening is you have people going down, the hierarchy, all the way down to, the intern, saying, what does that mean for me? And
Right.
that's the question that whoever's making the decision needs to be able to answer, in order to start to break down the walls of that resistance. Because that's really, at the end of the day, that's the big secret. People want to know, what does this mean for me? And so that's why, having user stories from a variety of different people, maybe if you're doing a large business transformation, ask everybody at the company for one single user story so that you can start to understand, okay, well, this is how, the marketing team feels like it's going to affect them. This is how our data science team feels like this decision will affect them. Let me, as the decision maker, address those concerns and help them feel like they're part of, the whole process so that they can become more on board. They can have some ownership in it. And it's really just taking the time to treat people like human beings and not just dictate to them, this is what we're doing, don't ask questions because I said so.
Right. Yep. Got it. No, that makes perfect sense. Can you tell us a little bit more about, the process, the platform, the performance perspective to your framework, and how you came up with that and why that's important?
Yeah, absolutely. And so to answer the question of how I came up with the framework. So one of the more recent buzz terms was digital transformation. So it was
Right.
people, process, technology. And I looked at that, and a lot of the literature that I read, a lot of the studies, a lot of the case studies and use cases really only focused on the technology piece of it. And so it was saying people, process, technology, but there was really no people and process involved in, implementing this new piece of, tech, this addition to what is probably already a complicated tech stack within your company. And so I saw that as an opportunity to reframe, the people, process, technology to, of course, we marketers, we love our alliteration. And so you have people, process, platform. Um, but what was also missing from it was, why the heck are we doing this thing? And so when I talk with my co-founder, he's the data scientist on our team. He'll hand me a piece of data. He'll hand me some sort of report he did or something he came up with. And the first question I always ask him and sort of always try to get him to think about is, so what? Why am I looking at this thing? Why am I giving you my time to, figure out what this is? And so when we create reports, if I can't figure out the so what within a few seconds, it's too complicated. We have to sort of rethink it. And so I wanted to lead with purpose. What is the question we are trying to answer by doing this thing, and making sure that every activity, requirements, implementing tech, building processes, analyzing data, always led back to what is the question we're trying to answer. Because if you can't tie back that line of, well, we want to switch to Twitter because we think it's the greatest platform, well, then why are you looking at TikTok? How does that factor into our goal being we want to switch to Twitter? And so making sure it keeps people focused so that when you get to the last P, which is performance, you can measure correctly. You're measuring the right things. You have the right sets of data in order to determine whether or not you were successful. And so the purpose should be stating how your performance should look. Your purpose should dictate your measurement strategy.
Got it. So I'm putting myself in the shoes of a decision maker who, is facing the journey of change management, phase zero, if you will. So who within the business, roles and levels of roles would I need to involve to make, the discovery phase, the initial stages of that process effective? Does that include IT? Does it also include the business, marketing? Like, who are those people that I would need to pull in to start my change management journey?
So one of the things that I've found to be pretty successful, because asking everybody in the company, their opinion on something, not necessarily scalable.
Right.
And they may or may not be impacted by the change. So what I would do is I would pull together maybe a steering committee of all the department heads or team leads, the different disciplines, to introduce the idea. Okay, so we want to implement a customer data platform. You marketing, do you feel like that, you need to be involved in this? IT, you probably need to be involved in this. So let's make sure it's on your radar. Risk management team, because we're dealing with PII, you probably need to be involved as well. And so making sure that the different departments in your organization at least have a heads up that this thing is happening, and then from there you can have those conversations of, okay, what would your requirements be, how would you use this data? And you may find you know the development team, they're not going to be involved at all because it's sort of just a plug and play kind of system. There's no customization, there's no APIs or whatever the situation is. But at least then they're like, okay, I know this thing is happening, I've had my say, I don't need to weigh in. Because a lot of times where this change management goes wrong is you didn't give teams a heads up because in your mind, well, they're not going to be involved anyway. If you flip that and just let them be the ones to say, yeah, we don't need to be involved, it's a much easier conversation and it's a much easier adoption because then they don't have that FOMO of, well, wait a minute, maybe I should have been involved, which will then start to delay your process of putting things together.
Right. Kind of have to be cognizant of how many cooks you have in the kitchen and making sure that they're the right ones.
Well, and then asking them for those user stories, of how will you use the data will really start to suss out whether or not they need to have a stake in it at all. Because they might say, oh, well, I actually don't think I'm going to use it for anything, but because I'm the engineering team, I should be involved. And then you can have that conversation of, okay, well, we've established that there's nothing from this piece of technology that you need, and we've established that you don't need to be the ones to set it up or maintain it. So how is it that you still need to be involved? And so it's, that's a pretty rushed version of that conversation, but that's sort of the idea.
Got it. So I'm thinking of, so many organizations now are fully remote or, hybrid. So is change management, is there some resistance or challenges within trying to, go along on an effective change management journey with your team working remotely? I'm curious what that looks like.
It shouldn't. It shouldn't matter whether or not your team is in person or if they're remote. What it comes down to is really how transparent you're being with the decisions that you're trying to make. And that's true of any organization. So whether your team is physically in front of you or 3,000 miles away, if you're not being transparent and upfront about this is the goal that we're trying to meet and this is why, you're not going to get very far because people will start to dig in their heels. I don't know what this means for me. Do I still have a job? You're implementing a CDP, but I'm the person who talks to all of the customers. Does that mean, I'm out? And so it really depends on your existing culture. If you have an organizational culture that isn't really transparent and collaborative, you're going to have a harder time regardless.
Right.
And so that's really what it comes down to. And then, really just talking to people it's what I've seen and what I've experienced businesses skip over because it takes time, because people can be unpredictable. I get that. I acknowledge that. I'm sitting here making it sound easy breezy. Just tell people what you're doing and, they'll be like, cool, whatever. It's obviously not that easy. There's a lot of emotions involved. There's a lot of feelings involved when you're making decisions that people feel like they're going to be affected by. And so it's not easy, and it's why a lot of companies skip over it and choose more of the, I'm just going to dictate to you what we're doing, and because I'm in this leadership position, you can't question it, because it's much easier than having to talk to you about it.
Right. Much easier to just do it instead of, face anticipated resistance and user adoption. And yeah, that can create a lot of, it can impact company morale, culture, morale, et cetera. So
Absolutely.
So I'm curious, what are some of the, are there any change management trends out there that, people who would be in the role of starting this journey should start, considering, whether it's a platform or, anything like that, might be kind of trending and, recommended that they do?
Well, in terms of trends of change management, digital transformation for a long time was the big one. But in terms of, practical applications, and if you want to get started yourself, then definitely, you know, think about, especially as we're talking in the context of a lot of data analysts, think about frameworks that are consistent and reliable. So we haven't talked a lot about process. A lot of times process will follow, a framework within a framework, which is the scientific method. And so having a hypothesis, testing your hypothesis, gathering, that is a repeatable process. And that is a well-known, consistent process that most people understand what it is. They know what to expect. And so, in this example of, we're implementing a CDP, well, as we are doing our data requirements, as we're doing our technical requirements, we can be following similar processes to, the project lifecycle, the software development lifecycle, the scientific method for how do we analyze the data? Do we have to use artificial intelligence, or can we do everything by hand, or do we need to code things? And so, in terms of getting started, I would say understand how to ask questions such as, why are we doing this? What are we doing this for? Who needs to be involved? How are we going to do this? What do we need to do this? How are we going to measure success? Those are the 5 basic tenets of change management. And if you can ask those questions and feel like you can get answers, then you're doing change management.
Got it. Well, that kind of led into my next question. I was going to ask you, as we start to wrap up here, if there are any, words of wisdom that you could lend our listeners, maybe from the perspective of, the decision makers who are driving this change to the individual contributors that really have to respond and execute on the change. I think any kind of tips, tricks, words of wisdom you could offer would be good.
Absolutely. Change management doesn't have to be big and painful, but any project that you're doing, you should be thinking about those basic 5 Ps, which is purpose, people, process, platform, and performance. And so if you can answer the 5 basic questions of, why are we doing this? Who needs to be involved? How are we going to do it? What do we need to use to do it? And how do we know we're successful? Then you should be golden. But if nothing else, start with the so what. Why are we doing this thing? How does it benefit our team? How does it benefit our customers? What is the goal? And if you're doing a project and you can't answer that question, you need to, slow down, go back and say, what is the purpose?
Got it. Well, very good advice for our listeners. And I think that for our listeners out there, definitely I would encourage you to connect with Katie Robert on LinkedIn. Do some research on True Insight and see, how potentially Katie's organization could lend value to your change management journey. I know it can be lengthy, but like Katie said, it doesn't have to be a very daunting and painful process, as long as you do your due diligence on the front end in terms of asking the right questions and getting the right framework in place. So well, with that being said, Katie, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. Is there anything that you would like to leave us with?
Don't be afraid to ask why. I think that's the best place to start.
All right. Simon Sinek would be proud.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Katie. We appreciate your time.